Krista, and welcome everybody. I'm delighted that you're all here today because I'm here really just to share a simple story of a group of people and their struggles, their successes, their ups and downs over a period of about 5 years. So this is the story of a community that formed and grew during that time. What I'm hoping is that this is a story that for anyone who is in a large organization, an orange organization, which is, you know, most large companies in the world really are still in that phase of evolution, that you will find something in this story that resonates with you, inspires you, maybe helps you see differently, think differently. And even if you're not, you know, I hope you enjoy the story and take something from it anyway. So, but it's really especially for those people who are in that kind of situation, trying to change a very big environment from a starting point of a small team. So let me share my screen, and I will just make sure this works. So once upon a time, we were a group of individuals scattered across this large organization. Now, when I say large, I'm talking about global, 100,000 people, 60 countries. I'm not naming the organization partly because it's confidentiality questions, but mostly really because it's not that relevant to the story. You know, that the properties of this organization are probably common across all large bureaucratic organizations, and the challenges we face are very similar. So I'm hoping you'll take from that, you know, that whatever environment you're in is probably very, very similar. So in those early days, we were individually all practitioners of change. Mostly we were working at that time in the technology space, in agile. We were trying to change the way people worked, so we were trying to do things in a different way. But we were all scattered. We were not necessarily officially in those roles. We were often doing it out of our own personal conviction. Somehow we connected. We found each other. And somewhat like the Unicorn Project, if you've ever read that book by Gene Kim, we started to feel like we were an underground movement. We were meeting informally. We were comparing notes. We were sharing our frustrations because, you know, there was no central mandate or organization to actually change things, but we were trying to do what we could. A couple of us had agile roles, but not everyone did. Now, by getting together as a community, we realized that we could co-create and help each other. And one of the things that we wanted to create was something that would shift the mindset, because we started to realize that our common problem here was helping people evolve their mindset away from Taylorist ways of, you know, managing things and people towards something at least, you know, becoming more empowering, more green in the teal color scheme. But so we separated out the agile practices from mindset, and we focused on creating something together that we could use to promote that mindset. Now, in those early days, we had a lot of fun doing this, but it was still, you know, it was hard. We didn't necessarily believe that we could change the organization. In fact, that would have been probably a wild fantasy at that point. But yet we had our conviction to try and find a better way. And that's what kept us going. And our community grew, you know, it started just to evolve. And I guess the thing that we didn't realize at this point, we had no idea that this was coming, was that we thought we were trying to change things around us. What we didn't realize was that we were going to become part of that change. So the little Calvin and Hobbes cartoon that you see here, I think encapsulates really well the kind of thinking that we had at that time. And by the way, Calvin and Hobbes, just a fantastic repository of wisdom over like 30 years of drawing cartoons, and it's all, you can find it free on the internet now. So yeah, so that's where we were at. Now, something soon came along that changed all that. We moved into, if you like, the spring of our journey. A new COO arrived, so a senior leader in the organization who was the kind of person who immediately practices and sets an example and has a vision. And from day one, one of the first things he did was reach out to our community and connect with us, because he had clearly the intention to significantly change how the organization worked. So we got invited to, as a loose community, to address his senior leadership team. We did some of our mindset work with them. We did a workshop, and suddenly overnight we went from trying to push ourselves onto the organization to being pulled by it. So you can't underestimate the effect that someone really at the top of a traditional organization can have, at least in the short term. It really, really created a pull. And he had his vision now was to move the concept of agility outside of what was previously limited to the technology world to the whole organization. So we were talking about business agility, we were talking about client journeys, we were talking about connecting the dots across the organization. And so that meant a whole new range of people started to get involved, and our stakeholders expanded, and we found that suddenly we were both very busy, and ourselves having to stretch ourselves and learn and grow as a group. Now, part of this time saw the setting up of a central transformation group, a centralized group with the responsibility to change the organization. And many of our community then moved to that group and took roles there. So it was a very promising and exciting time, because we had, for the first time, a mandate to actually change the whole organization. And within that quite large transformation group, which was made up of practitioners of different disciplines and different change agents, lean people, agile coaches, and us, we were kind of like a little bit special. So we formed a little sub-team within there. And we called ourselves Transformation Capabilities. And what you have here is a vision that we created for ourselves. That we tried to summarize what we were about in as few words as possible. And it gives you an idea of what we were thinking at the time. There's this emerging realization that this was starting to be more than just about ways of working and agile. So I mean, even the very first thing here is create safety. We're starting to realize it's about culture as well. And that unlocking brilliance, that is about people fundamentally. People's brilliance is what we were talking about. And communities, because they are the oil in the wheels. They are the informal network that actually really gives change, sustainability and power, and cuts across the silos of a traditional hierarchy. So yes, and all of these things combining to grow the organization that we were in. So it was a fantastic time. It was, and at that time, someone joined our team who was kind of a catalyst, because even though we were change people, even though we were agile practitioners, and we were promoting the idea of a different mindset in the organization, if you've worked in traditional kind of organization for most of your career, it's very hard to actually let go of all the assumptions and beliefs that come from being part of that system. So the catalyst who joined the team had come from a very different background. She hadn't had the same corporate background, to the same degree that we all had. She was playful and curious and full of energy. And she helped shift. And in fact, she was probably like the most Teal person in the group at that time. So with her integration into the team, we started to shift. We started to experiment more radically with how we operate as a team. I think there's someone.
That is the translation.
It's coming out in real time. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to before I talk about exactly how our team operated. I want to talk a little bit about leadership in the Teal context. So I mean, what does it even mean to talk about leadership in a self-organizing team? And the first thing is I'll observe is that in the small team that we had, we were all leaders. Partly because the nature of the work meant we were always going out and engaging with people and trying, evangelizing, listening, trying to help them shift. We were leading the way. So we had to be leaders. We had to be able to influence others. Also within the team, we were in a state of flux. It wasn't as if, we being a self-organizing, self-managing kind of team, the leadership would shift, moment by moment. Any one of us could step in and take charge of, or take responsibility for what was being discussed at that moment. So there's a leadership model here, which I find, although we didn't consciously use this at the time, it actually explains what was going on very, very well. So in the coactive leadership model, leadership is defined as taking responsibility for your world. And that responsibility is a choice, it's not a burden. It's something you willingly take on. Now, within that frame of thinking, the coactive philosophy is one that's entirely about wholeness. In fact, it's described as the practice of recovering the inherent wholeness that's in us all that may have been forgotten. So it's underpinned by a fundamental belief that people are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. It's a very humanist philosophy. So that was very much aligned to our values. And the elements of this model demonstrate different aspects of leadership. So leadership from the front at the top there is your visionary, is your, this is where we want to go and follow me because this is where we're going. And that's maybe your most traditional kind of leadership. Leadership behind is servant leadership. It is I'm here to support all of you in whatever way you need. That actually made a lot of sense to us too, because that's the leadership that you see in Agile as well, empowering, supportive. Leadership aside is very interesting. That's the synergy of two people leading together. That's like parenthood. That's the energy of leading from a place that's neither you or the other person, but from the synchronicity between you. And leadership in the field is in some ways the most Teal. That is the one that's listening, that's intuitive, that's looking for what's emerging. So we were jumping between all of these aspects all the time. We were in a constant state of movement between all of these things, and that was an education for us. Now, what really drives all of these aspects is the leader within, and that is the personal, that is the inner self, the confidence to act, the the letting go of the ego and the fears and the doubts and accepting accepting yourself for who you are. So that, I think, in the last talk, there was ego was compared to like a cigarette. It's a bad habit that makes you feel good. We all struggled at this time with, am I adding enough value? Am I making an impact? Are we being seen? Our self-doubts were a painful feature because we were, this is a difficult, challenging role when you're trying to change and you don't necessarily have any immediate success and you have lots of setbacks. It's very, very difficult on the ego. So we doubted ourselves, but as a team, we were able to support each other in that journey of acceptance and growth and developing our leadership skills. So I say all this, that it was distributed, that it was, all of us were leaders, but there was one person in the team who was formerly the leader of the team, as far as the organization was concerned, but it was also, in that very same sense, she was the person taking responsibility for this world, for all of us. And she was all these things and more, because she was simultaneously one of us and someone that inspired us all and role modeled the values that we all shared. So for me, that's really what leadership in a Teal team is. It's not, it's not directive. It is all of the things I've described, but it's something more than that. It's someone who leads not just the people in the team, but the energy of the whole team. And so we were very fortunate to have a leader like that through, this whole journey. Now, before I jump to describing some of the actual practices in our team, I just wanted to check in with Krista if there were any questions at this point. I have to take a small pause.
Thank you. I think one question that is coming up, and perhaps it's a good point for you now to take on, is you spoke about creating this safety. So practically, how does that look like? How did it look like for your team?
So in our team, I mean, I think that there are levels and levels of psychological safety, and the highest level really is being absolutely okay to challenge constructively anyone else in the team and to have no fear in doing so, and to call out when things are not working well, and to, again, have no fear that that will be a bad thing to do. So, I mean, I think our safety evolved, and actually maybe this is a good lead into this, to our practices, because we had to consciously design it. We had to consciously agree, that we wanted to be a team which had that level of safety. And we had to put some practices in place to help make sure that that was always the case. So we could argue with each other. In our team, safety wasn't just being nice and polite to each other all the time and not hurting each other's feelings. Sometimes we did really, discussions would get quite heated. And sometimes, we had to remember that everyone else in the team means well. And we had a rule, and it's actually on this board: assume positive intent. So, even if things got to a difficult place and there were tensions, we would call out those tensions, and we would always remember to assume that the other person's intention was positive. And that would help us resolve those tensions. We never let them lie or stagnate. In fact, actually, at an earlier Teal conference, I think it's last year, I picked up from one of the storytellers that they had this wonderful template for tension meetings and resolving them. We actually never used it because our team is relatively small, and we tended to address them on the spot or immediately after. But I think the important thing is not letting them go. And then when you know that you can do that and everything's going to be okay, then you just feel safe. And I think also in the culture of design, there is also a very great alignment of values. So you know that, even if it seems that someone is opposing you, that they're not. That we all have a common ultimate goal. Does that answer? I hope that addresses that point.
And take us through the story. What comes next? What season comes next?
So we are forming, and we are experimenting and playing with Teal practices. And so I mentioned there are many of them here. I'll mention a few of them. Some of them are very simple, like Elmo. Elmo is just, it's a cuddly toy from Sesame Street, but it stands for enough, let's move on. Anyone in any meeting can call us out anytime. It's a simple way of saying, look, I'm bored, and this can wait, or it's not the best use of all of our time. I'm very proud of the fact we had horizontal one-to-ones. I mean, that speaks to one-to-ones in our organization were traditionally the manager and the employee, and it's often, performance-based rather than growing the person. We would have horizontal one-to-ones across the team. So we would set aside time for each other and use them in different ways. But that was, that shaped the dynamic of the team. We abandoned having roles in the team, even if we had formal ones in the organization. What it turned out was that we operated from a place of collective intelligence. So almost anything that we did, either more than one of us would work on, or even if one person was taking the initial lead on things, there would always be sharing with the team, getting feedback, and what we call swarms, where we get the whole team to try and resolve a challenge or a problem. So it was very, very fluid in that regard. So yeah, the last one I mentioned quickly, our interview process. Rather than measuring people against some arbitrary role description, we'd set a challenge, something realistic that we were also thinking about as a team. Invite the person, give them some time to think about it and come back, and then show us that they're thinking, but then we would then work on it together as a team and observe how they just interacted with the rest of us. So this was really testing whether they shared the same way of working and were comfortable not, having to own every idea and being too attached to their point of view. So being able to work in a collective way. And in the final part of the interview, it was they were interviewing us. We just brought the whole team and said, this is your chance, because it's like it's a relationship. It has to be both ways. So I'll move on then to the next part of the narrative. So this was an exciting time, as I say, and we came to a point where the CEO decided that it was time to actually explicitly announce the purpose of the organization, to define it, and to get everyone behind it. And while many organizations have a stated purpose, that isn't actually that revolutionary or visionary, this was something truly extraordinary, because it was way, way beyond what you think the company could actually achieve. These were truly global intentions. So accelerating the path towards net zero for the planet, lifting participation, lifting 1 billion people out of poverty, and resetting the globalization, the effects of globalization, so that you'd have a fairer, more equitable way of trading in the world. So these are things that you can you can be inspired by. You can understand that what you're then doing is something way beyond just returning profits for the shareholders of the company. And so I was tremendously excited, and we all in the team got involved in helping facilitate the discussions around this purpose, starting with the most senior leadership and propagating it through the organization. It felt for the first time that dream of actually really changing the organization wasn't a fantasy anymore. It felt like, this is the true purpose of the organization, and the purpose, and we are becoming a purpose-led organization. And so in this time, this felt like almost the peak for our team, in that this opened up new avenues for us. This is now, again, way beyond just ways of working. This was, who are we as an organization, and what do we want to become? What's emerging? So that we did a lot of work with leadership in this time. We did some of our most creative work in this time. We felt that we were unbounded. In a sense, we were setting out an agenda from here. And so I look back on this time and think, anything could have been possible. And for a while, that certainly seemed how it was going to be. Now, suddenly the images here haven't come through for some reason. You'll have to imagine, there are two pictures here. One is of a gardener trimming, planting roses, everything neat and tidy. We felt we were the gardeners in the organization up to this point. We thought, well, we need to plant a few roses here, trim this fence, this hedge a little bit here. We still thought that was, our role. Once things opened up, we realized it's not actually a garden that we're operating in, it's a wilderness. The full complexity and scale of the organization started to feature more in our thinking. We felt now that, that scalability was a huge challenge. We started to realize we cannot cultivate manually everything. We have to somehow extend our presence. We were still only a relatively small team in a group of 100,000. So we needed a ripple effect. We needed to leverage on the relationships we'd built, the communities we'd helped grow. We needed something bigger. And this is a problem I think we never quite solved, in fact. Although we'd made very good strides, because we did a lot of community building work. Both with practitioners, with people in the businesses, with champions of the way we worked. To some extent, in fact, almost everything we were doing was then somehow building a community. I'll come back to that point later. So eventually everything has to change. And we started to feel from the outside of the organization some winds, some cold winds, as it were. There was a resistance starting to come up. Some of our earlier work as a broader transformation group had mixed results, and people were starting to say, well, we need to see some concrete results. So still needing to make it real for some parts of the organization. And it's probably fair to say that we had perhaps been too diluted in chasing after too many things. So we needed a focal point. So we got together as a big team. So this is a whole transformation group, and we said, look, we need something that people can get behind. And we came up with a simple focal point, which was, we called it speed to value, but it was really about looking at the end-to-end process and observing that actually it's not the time that people are working that's inefficient, it's actually the time waiting for work to start it's the bureaucracy of the whole process. It's getting the approvals. It's waiting for the next person to look at something so that then they pass it to someone else. And so it was easy to do some like lean style analysis where you saw that it took months and months for any projects to get approved or vendors to get onboarded or anything of that nature. So that was an obvious target, And there's a second aspect of this, which was the complexity of the organization meant, curiously, for an orange organization, there was a huge lack of transparency. So quite often, an urgent external request would come into the organization and it would bounce around the different parts of the organization until it finally got to the place it should do, at which point it was too late to do anything about it. So there was very little horizontal transparency. And so the picture here is this was actually killing growth. And so it was an obvious thing to go after. And what that meant for us as a team was that we had to give up a little bit of our autonomy as a capabilities team to go after anything we wanted. We merged back in to some extent with a larger team. So we had the challenge of trying to preserve our little Teal team, our self-managing ways, in a larger team now that suddenly we're organized not so much by team, but by actual work outcome. So that if you see a big Kanban board here, the horizontals are actually just pieces of work that with an outcome attached. So suddenly we were spread across, and while we all liked the idea, I guess, of having a focal point and something contributing to something bigger, we were ironically terrified of losing our identity as a team. We were merged into this larger group. Now, it's very ironic because, of course, this is exactly the kind of change that we were promoting across the rest of the organization. And so suddenly to say to us, well, yeah, you've got to do it for yourselves. This is when we started to realize that we had to be part of the change too, that the change is something that wasn't, we were instigating, that we are part of it. And in starting to understand that and starting to accept that, we actually, I think, made significant progress as a team, because we found that we could still retain our identity and we still continue to meet as a team, even though now our work was distributed into different places. The team survived, and actually, I think we did some of our best work in some ways, and some of the most interesting work, certainly in this period, because of the infusion of other people and the broadening of the connections. We developed our skills further in this time. So finally, all things have to come to an end, and there was again a change of leadership, and the COO left, and a new senior leader came in, and there was a lot of change at the very top. And the new leadership, they were very much pushing back towards an achievement-focused, KPI, target-driven, orange kind of thinking. And for quite a while, there was complete uncertainty as to whether all the work that we've been doing over the last few years was still going to be needed, and what would happen exactly. So we found ourselves again in the position of many people in the organization, struggling to accept change. And it was very hard, and the uncertainty did make it very hard. And it took a while, I mean, for me personally, to come around to this point of view, but I started to understand that change itself has its seasons. That you don't fear the change in the natural world. As the seasons change. So actually, there's no reason to look at what was happening as ultimately a threat, because winter in the natural world is a time of renewal and rebirth, and it gives the opportunity to let go of things and to find new areas to grow. So we are now in winter with spring on our way. And the reason I remain optimistic is I can see spring is coming. And I know everything that we've done in this organization means that when spring comes, the blossoming will be even more powerful than the year before, because all of our gardening, all of our planting of seeds has grown very powerful communities. There are now literally thousands of people who we've interacted with over the years, and so many of them are now permanently, irrevocably changed in how they think and what they expect and what they want from the organization they're part of, and committed that, these are now leaders who in the next blossoming will drive things forward. And I got a sense of this, at the Christmas party at the end of last year. And our organization is big, so it's a huge event, even in Singapore, is where I live. Because during the course of the night, so many people who bumped into, were happy to see us. We saw visually, the impact that we'd had. So I'll leave you with just a quotation: "The love of gardening is a seed once sown that never dies." And to answer the question at the beginning of, what can you do in a large traditional publicly owned organization? Well, you may not have the perfect conditions for truly changing to teal, but you can. Everything that you do is valuable because it will never fade away, and it may have its seasons and it may have its process it goes through, but it always goes forward. And so I feel that everything we did was immensely valuable because of the potential it's created for the future. So that's our story. Thank you so much for listening, and I'd love to hear your thoughts and questions.
Thank you very much, Zav, for this, taking us through the story, through the seasons, and as our audience says, thank you for planting these seeds in us today as well, not only in your organization. So if we go through the seasons and through the gardening work that you've had, one question that I'd like us to start with is, what was the purpose of your group, of your transformation group, when you got together? And how did you achieve to persuade the top management to leave you in your own little bubble and do your thing? How did you get started?
Well, it was actually the presence of a senior leader who understood the need to create autonomy and empower the people he had to do the thing they did best. So it was down to that ultimately, that we had the space created for us, and we were able to take advantage of that. Now, to some extent, when we were the individuals struggling against the system at the beginning, we still had a certain amount of autonomy, but we didn't have mandate, and this now we had both. So we were able to form ourselves, and importantly, we were able to choose who was in the team, from the very outset. So that meant we could shape both, the people in the team, but also the purpose of the team with that level of independence.
Thank you. Now, moving on in your journey, you spoke about a change of leadership that brought you into a point where you had to rethink, you had to reposition yourself. So, one question from our audience is, what would your advice be when a team gets to this point where the support from the leadership is no longer there? How did you persuade them, and how did you find the strength in your team to keep going during those circumstances?
Well, it was extremely difficult, and I found it personally very, very challenging, because it was almost my initial reaction was, well, you know, once it became clear the new direction of things, I thought, well, this is very, very hard. You know, everything we've done is wasted. It took a while to let go of that viewpoint, that perspective, and recognize that it's although the leaders have an effect, the relationships you build, the communities that you grow, the impact you have is in a way more sustainable and longer lasting, because leaders change and directions change and strategies change. And actually, we shouldn't be afraid of change. So yes, it was frustrating, but I think it's about evolving to recognizing that you're part of the system. So things will also, you have to accept that change will happen to you too.
During your story, you spoke a lot about this informal organization, the connections, the relationships. How important were these to carry you through your journey in such a large organization? And how do you think that this could scale up, this kind of relationships, when you got to the stage where you were incorporated into a larger group? How do these relationships and the connections, the networks, the little gardening hubs that you create, how do these scale up?
Well, yeah, I think the relationships were and the building of the communities were by far the most important thing that we did ultimately, because I mean the actual tasks and projects and so forth that we got involved in, they're context and situation dependent, while the communities is something that you need to build regardless if you're really trying to change anything. To some extent, the scalability came by accident. We for example, we created a course to help people become Scrum Masters. In the early days, we were trying to create more agile teams. It turns out what we put into that course created leaders. It inspired people to think differently and to do new things, and they didn't necessarily become Scrum Masters, but they did even better than that. They changed. They tried to influence the people around them in the organization. So, almost by accident, we created a community of people who were aligned in what they wanted to do. It is a challenge to understand truly how to scale. Now, I think the closest we got to answering that question was in looking at speed to value. We realized actually, if you look at things from a systems thinking point of view, there is a pivot point, like a critical bottleneck in every system. And if you can identify it, because you've created the transparency to do so, then actually that's the only place you need to change, and all other change actually is wasted. So that's another learning that came out of this experience, that if actually to be very smart about identifying the right place to change at any one moment, and to be very, very responsive and to be able to shift, when that's no longer the place to change.
That's a really interesting learning, because it takes me to the next question that I would like to ask you. You spoke about these practices that you set up, and they were successful. Were there other experiments, things that you tried that didn't really work out? And would you like us to would you like to take us through these little trials and failures? How did you experience them and what did you learn from them?
Well, there were probably more failures than successful practices that I listed there. And I mean, I think I'll give one example. We frequently tried to measure our own flow as a team, so our throughput, and so we had, following again sort of Kanban and lean principles, we had a board and we had items on that board, and we just wanted to see for how many are we doing each week and so forth. We repeatedly tried to measure it, but we never really kind of did much with that, with the measurements, which kind of ultimately told us it wasn't that important. So I think experimenting is always good. You always learn from it. In our case, we learned that, this probably, if it was more important, if it had value, then we would more likely have found a way to use those results in some way. But, we felt we should try it because it was it's part of our own drive to continuously improve our team and to see where there were our own bottlenecks lay. Maybe I'm being a bit harsh because that wasn't a complete failure. We probably still learned something from it in that sense. Well, I mean, we still probably used some of the results. So, yeah.
So then let me take you to the space where you're not harsh, but you recognize and you praise what the journey brought you. What is the legacy that you left with your team in the organization? What is the legacy? What are they going to speak about through this journey that you had and through your gardening?
I think it could be a question for them, because I believe there's a couple of my teammates on the call. I'm not sure if I can see them.
Yes.
I'd invite them to speak up if they are here.
So is anyone from Zav's team here? And if yes, would you please like to speak about the legacy that your team has created?
Hi. I'm not sure if my camera's working or you can see me, but yeah, hi, I'm Leah and I'm from Zaf's team. Can you hear me okay?
Hi, yes. We can hear you.
Okay. Hey, so yeah, it's great to hear our story told like this. In terms of the legacy, I think Zaf's saying about the community. So yeah, as he said, we're kind of coming through the winter, we're coming into the next spring. There's a bit more clarity on the transformation and the things that the team should be going after again. And what I'm really seeing from the benefit is that community, those people out there that were inspired to do things differently. Maybe we've all been kind of quietly hibernating in the last 6 months, but they're all still there and they're ready to go. And I think we're seeing new messages, new green shoots, things that we can go after, and we have a way bigger network to build on that now than we had a couple of years ago. So yeah, I do think it's about the people and the connections, especially in our organization. It's extremely complex to get things done, but it is definitely who you know, who you're connected to, and that helps you achieve much better things. So that's one of the things I'd say. I think we have other team members here too, so I'm sure they've got thoughts.
Thank you, Leah, very much. And anyone else from the team that would like to jump in?
Hi, this is Sharon.
Hi.
Yeah, I just want to double click on what Leah and Zev have said. I think the really key point that I wish everyone to take away from our story is this: every seed counts. Yeah, and I'll leave it as that.
Thank you. That's a beautiful message to leave us with. Every seed helps. And so with this hopeful message, what is the dreams that you have for your future and for this transformation underway? What would you like to see happening next?
I feel that the broader changes that are happening in the world, I mean, with the pandemic and the shift of consciousness about, I mean, it opened up the conversation as to what work actually is and could be. And Leah observed actually when I was talking to her the other week that one of the things that, you know, that our team had done, which was interesting, was it had created space for the new generation, the Gen Zs, the youngest people in the organization. Because when we'd had a number of graduates and interns joining our team for a period, and it seemed that it was more aligned to how they truly wanted to work. It was like, you know, they were surprised, you know, to find a team like that, and it gave them the space to be who they were. So I feel that everything we've done is moving towards that place of wholeness for the organization, and that all organizations are inevitably moving towards that. You know, as the new generation, you know, grows older and, you know, and becomes more prominent, this is the way we're all going, and so we've been part of opening that up, and that's something that I'm looking forward to.
Thank you, Zaf. What is really interesting in the story is that you have taken us through different seasons, through the different challenges, the blossoming, the work, maybe some thorns that grow along the way, and the rebirth of the earth, of the garden. So this combination of birthing, rebirthing, continuing, I think it's a beautiful image to keep as we draw the storytelling to an end. And I would like to ask you if you could share some parting thoughts with us, some advice. If we are about to get started now, to start planting seeds, what would your advice be to us? What would be the first three things that you would like us to be careful about? You would tell us, yes, do them. And for this, be mindful about. What would you tell us about us becoming the gardeners inspired by your story?
Well, the two things immediately spring to mind is be aware of the connection between the journey that you're taking for your organization and the journey that you're taking for yourself. That just as in Lulu's book, they're intimately connected. This is something that really came to life for us in this journey, that we all had a journey of personal growth in parallel with this journey, and our beliefs, our thoughts, our perception changed during the journey. The other thing I'd say is look to the long term. You know, be more than ready for short-term setbacks, for periods where nothing seems to be generating a result. Take the seasonal view that some things take a long time to grow, and they may produce fruit in unexpected places. So I suppose that brings me to a third point, which is flexibility in your own practices and ideas of what needs changing. We certainly shifted from thinking that we knew what should change and we were the gardeners to really just being present, listening to the system and feeling what needed to change, and being part of it rather than trying to be the cultivators of it. So yeah, those are the I guess the distilled thoughts I'd want to leave everyone with.
Thank you, Zaf, very much. For this beautiful story, we can see in the comments from the chat and the questions that it was really inspiring, that you took us through this journey and that you planted seeds within us about how to turn Teal, how to go about little seeds of Teal practices, but also being mindful that we change ourselves and that we are the gardeners and we are in an ecosystem. So thank you very much for this story, this inspiration, for your time, the dedication that you've put in, and the care that you've shown for your team, also inviting them to contribute with their comments. Thank you as well to your team for being here, and
Thank you both for joining in. Thank you.
thank you as well to our participants in the chat. I don't know if you would like to tell our audience a little goodbye, Zaf, as we come to the end of the session.
Well, thank you all. I'm delighted to have had the chance to share the story. It's something that's been in my heart, and this is the first time I've told it in a public way. And thank you for all receiving it and being here to hear me share it. So thank you.